Hey, welcome back. Today I'm starting on a short series for especially new teachers and those who aren't used to APPR. Um, Essentially, your performance reviews every year for those of you who are not teachers. Um, Mine is based on New York State's typical method. There's a lot of wiggle room within the state, and observations and criteria aren't the same everywhere, but they all follow along the same basic idea and the same sort of rubrics. They just have different semantics, is really all it comes down to. So I'm going to walk you all through an observation from start to finish. I figure at this point it's a good time for me to start showing you all. I'm going to show you my actual observation materials, matched with my latest one. Um, and I figure it's about time that I show you all I'm not just blowing some hot air here when I'm telling you things you can do to run your classroom. Um, the observations speak for themselves, especially when your administrators put comments in. So uh, this serves kind of a dual purpose. It's going to help you all understand how teachers are evaluated, and it's going to also just kind of reinforce the fact that I'm not just saying things because I think they sound good or they're idealist. Um, I'm trying to be real. So, because of the amount of time it will take to go through some of these, I'm going to do one part at a time, and we'll have a short series of videos here on evaluations and APPR. So, enjoy.
All right. So, we're going to start off with the very beginning of what you would find in a teacher conference, or in this case, what my school district calls the pre-conference. Typically, your annual APPR for new teachers, you'll have 2 or 3 observations and an unannounced walkthrough. Um, a lot of people get anxiety over it. I know when I was a new teacher, I had a ton of anxiety over evaluations. It's part of the reason why I left my first school district was because of the way they did observations. Um, I was told that I didn't have much worth, and essentially it was because I didn't fit into their particular school district's cookie cutter, which is what they looked for in basically every teacher. They wanted everyone to teach exactly the same way. That doesn't work well when your teaching philosophy is the way that mine is. So I ended up leaving there, and now that I moved to my second district, they give us the freedom that we need in order to be effective in our classrooms, and they trust us to be the professionals and the experts in what we do. So you'll find that this particular observation, this one is uh, one that was completed with my. Technically, the title is the Director of Special Education, was my assigned district office administrator this year. The way the tenure process works in New York is a 4-year process, and each year you get evaluated by both your principal, who generally comes in, does one formal observation and one unannounced walkthrough, and then you get an observation from one of the district office administrators. That would be your assistant superintendent or someone on that level, and then as you go through, you get a different one each year. So my first year, I had one assistant superintendent. My second year, I had another. My third year, I had this person who, even though they're called a director, they function as an assistant superintendent. And then next year, to complete my tenure process, the superintendent himself will be coming in to observe me. And that's generally how it works in New York State. That's pretty standardized across the entire board. So when we set up an observation, we plan on a date and all that kind of stuff. And we just this year started using a program called KickUp. I'm still unsure what I think of it so far, so I'm not going to go into detail on it. But that's essentially the format that has gotten us into these documents. So as you can see, this is a recent evaluation. This was my last one for the year. So the first thing they have us do is come in and we have what's called a pre-conference meeting, right? It's basically me and the observer sit down together and we talk about what is going to happen and what I expect, as well as what I expect them to notice during the observation, right? So I'll go through this step by step. So some notes on it, okay? I love this write-up here because it explains everything that I'm just talking about, right? It says both the evaluator and the teacher review the following questions prior to the pre-conference. Okay, so we look at these before we actually meet so that we have items to talk about. Okay, me as the teacher, I'm the one who fills out this document. Okay, then they use it in order to frame their own questions for me before we do the observation. So first thing here is I have to identify my learning standards. Okay, in New York State, we use a mix, especially for tech education. If you were a math person, you would use your math standards. If you were, any topic, you'd be using your standards. So I have in here, I also use general teaching standards. So Common Core, okay. These are New York State is weird in the way that they label stuff. So instead of calling it like item 1 and item 6, they're calling them shifts. So I'm showing that I have curriculum standards and how they're going to connect outside of the discipline. So I've got knowledge of the disciplines, right? I'm tech education, so I essentially teach everything in applied form. So I take all that theoretical knowledge of our normal core classes and bring them together. Okay, academic vocabulary. I teach vocabulary for everything I do. Sometimes I don't teach it explicitly, but I make sure that I have repetitions of whatever I'm saying that I want them to learn. That way it sticks in their minds. Okay, New York State Learning Standards. Okay, this is sort of an overarching standard for the 7th and 8th grade tech classes. Okay, and this observation was done with 7th grade Intro to Tech class. Okay, so they'll apply technological knowledge and skills. They're going to design, construct, use, and evaluate products and systems in order to satisfy needs. Right, it's basically problem solving. Okay, then I go through use of tools and materials. Okay, so what I look at here is that they can select tools and materials based on safety, availability, right, appropriateness, whether it's good for what they're doing. Okay, I send them through processes, and essentially, since this is what I'm showing is part of their capstone project, I run them through all of these different standards. Okay, so technological systems. Okay, we're trying to achieve a specific result. I'll talk about what that is in a minute. Then I go through the regular New York State teaching standards here. So, showing that I have knowledge of my students and how they learn. Okay, knowledge of my content and my ability to plan. Okay, these are all on the New York State Education Department website. Okay, I am looking that my instructional practice is good. Okay, my instructional practice is good, so I can communicate, I can set expectations, and the kids understand those expectations. Right? Standard 4 is creating your learning environment. That's what I've talked about a lot in my videos here on YouTube. Right? Is creating a positive and effective learning environment, and that's key to hitting everything else. Right? If you can't set a good learning environment, everything else is moot. Right? You could be the most well-informed, studious teacher there is. If you can't apply it, it's useless. So that's the beginning there. I lay out all my standards. Okay. So before I continue on, I need to give some context of what this lesson was. So in this case, the lesson I was teaching is how to create a bill of materials. Right? It's basically a shopping list. So I teach the kids about board feet of lumber and how to organize and do a little bit of budgeting. Okay, it's standard stuff, nothing too crazy there. If you look in the public share drive, I believe I have a copy of the bill of materials worksheet in there, so feel free to take a look around. You can find the link on the channel, and you can also find it through a link on my Facebook page. So that bill of materials is part of a larger project, which is to design an item, okay, some sort of product that will be built using wood and screws, Okay, just regular drywall screws, basic pine, that kind of stuff. They have to design it, so they have to come up with ideation sketches, um, and then they have to come up with just a set of plans and measurements, which is where the bill of materials comes in. Because I tell them, if you can draw it and you can tell me what size it is, then you can build it, and not before then. Um, so I give them about 5 weeks to take care of that. So usually they spend about a week planning, and then the other 4 weeks they get to spend building, and that's where this comes into play. So moving forward, okay, student achievement data informing my instruction. Okay, all it's asking is, how does my lesson address the needs based on previous data that I've looked at. So this is all written in this is my wording. Achievement data, okay. Um, their previous work with measurement, okay, basic product design, drafting skills, okay, hands-on fabrication and material processing. I've done all these things with them since my time with the 7th grade class, which was sort of an abbreviated curriculum this year because I got moved partway through the year to a different course. Um, I managed to get through these skills, and the students had opportunities to use them. So we did our basic measurement unit. Okay, they learned a little bit of isometric drawing, and they learned a little bit of plan drawing, how to do labeling measurements and factoring in thicknesses, all that kind of stuff. Okay, they learned how to use tools. Okay, they made a boot jack, was their wood project this year. Okay, and the rest of it is just their experience. So how to be safe in the shop, all that kind of stuff. That all comes together, and that's what tells me that the students have sufficient understanding to learn this particular content. Right? Also, knowing what they're doing in math class helps quite a bit. Right? Make sure you get out of your room, talk to other teachers that your students have, especially if you're in a school that uses a team system where you have teams of teachers that all have the same kids. Okay. Then I look at what experience the kids already have. Okay, I already had them making a cut list, which was just coming up with the sizes, and what the bill of materials does is it just adds in some of that detail. It puts more formal specifications and budgeting. Right. So we do that. Okay, and then let's see here. Right, the lesson builds on their existing experience. That's really key to everything, is building on what they've already got. Then I look at the cut list. Okay, once they've made a cut list successfully, I know that they can move on to do the budgeting. Okay, essentially, all the kids have been able to do a cut list, but when it comes to math, they might have a little trouble, even though we're using simple multiplication and division equations. So, at this grade level in 7th grade, I call it extensive support. Especially when they're learning new content. 7th graders have a lot of trouble. They're just not attentive, and that results in a lot of repetition being needed. So, the other thing to factor in is that for tech, 7th grade is the first year most kids have tech, especially in New York. So, it's like saying that a student is at kindergarten level in the tech sequence. Right? That's really what it comes down to. So they may be a 7th grader when it comes to math, science, English, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to tech, this is their first experience with it. So you have to keep it pretty well secured. Where they have the biggest trouble is thinking in 3 dimensions. Right? Up to this point, most of them haven't had enough time in art classes or tech classes to think in 3D. They haven't learned how to draw things in 3D that much, right? They've only done what I've taught them. So thinking that way and thinking how different pieces fit together and how they fasten together is not something that their brains are used to doing. So being very deliberate and forcing them to put that detail in there, it jumpstarts their minds, and that's how you get the results you're looking for. Okay? So that's the kind of stuff I explain, and that's exactly how I would have explained it in my meeting with my observer. Okay, what do I want my students to learn? Simple statement, right? Students will be able to. I always start it with that, right? This is a goal. You're setting a learning goal. So the goal is the students will be able to something, right? In this case, they're going to create a bill of materials to calculate the amount and cost of the materials associated with building their product. Okay? So they're applying it to a real life situation, right? They want to build something, they need to plan it and budget it, right? So I'm walking them through a process, and that's what they're going to be able to do. Okay. The next thing I'd be looking at is how do I know if the kids are meeting the expected outcome? Okay, and that's just there's two ways of doing that. That's your assessment, right? That's your assessment portion. So in this case, for assessment, you're looking at formative assessment and summative assessment, right? Basically, formal and informal, data driven and observation driven. So in order for them to show that they've mastered my desired outcome, right, that they're able to make a bill of materials, okay, that is my goal, right? That's what I want to see. Is I want them to make a bill of materials for their project. Okay, so once again, it's a simple statement, right? Keep it simple. Okay, so basically the rule is clear, concise, correct. Okay, the 3 C's of technical writing: clear, concise, and correct. You're keeping it as short as possible to get your point across, and your information is correct. That's what you're looking for. So that starts it off. Okay, the next thing, okay, is your planning. So how are you going to engage the kids? Okay, what am I going to do in order to grab their attention? How am I going to cater to their varying learning styles, right? Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, the way that you are teaching students of different learning styles. I'm having a mental block, so I'm not going to be able to use the correct word. But catering to those learning styles, I add in an extra one that most people don't when I look at this. So I talk how I'm going to engage them. So in this case, they're going to be engaged because they need to do this in order to plan and build their product, right? My delivery methods are what I specify here. So I go with auditory, okay? I'm doing a verbal walkthrough. I'm doing visual, so there's a visual aid. In this case, I use a document camera. I live and die by the document camera for this kind of stuff. Okay, it's great for showing stuff to kids that's too small to show in a regular format. Okay, the kinesthetic aspect, right? What are they physically doing? Okay, global. I'll circle back to here. But lastly, metacognitive. Okay, the students are going to have to relate what they're doing here to real world situations. They're going to have to think about the way that they think. Right? That's really what metacognition is thinking about thinking. Okay, so that metacognitive domain. Okay, I have the kids think about, you're doing a budget list here. Where else would you do this in real life? Right? Why would you need to do it in real life? That's what that's there for. Okay. What I look at, which I unfortunately don't see very many teachers doing, is the global aspect of learning. So you have many, many forms of learners. You have auditory, visual, kinesthetic. There are a whole bunch more, but the one I like the most is global. Okay, global is one of the toughest ones to explain, and it's also one of the toughest learning styles to really understand. The global learning style is the way that I personally learn, and I feel like a lot of teachers don't cater to it enough. So the global learning style means that I don't really understand things until I see the big picture, where the thing I'm learning fits into the larger grouping, right? So if I'm showing these kids a bill of materials and I don't give it the context of where it fits amongst the whole picture, then I don't understand what I'm doing. And I believe it's the same for a lot of kids, and unfortunately not enough people really cater to that. They do the auditory, visual, kinesthetic. If they're good, they get to metacognitive, but global, to me, that is the gold star right there, is being able to cater to a global learning style, right? making sure that the kids understand the big picture and where what they're doing fits into it. Right. So that's that portion. Okay. One of these days I might do a video on global learning styles because I haven't seen much involved with it. That would be I could talk for a while about that because it's really interesting. The human brain and the human condition are just very interesting to me. That's why I love psychology so much. So, differentiation. That's the word I was looking for up here, right? It's how I'm going to differentiate in order to factor in those learning styles, right? So, mental block is now fixed. Okay. So, the way that I use differentiation, okay, I provide, unfortunately, this is just a necessity at this point. I have always been a hard copy paper teacher. I believe it engages the kids more. It gives them something to do that's tactile, something that they can actually hold in their hands and look at. Unfortunately, because of the requirements of teaching in the pandemic, Google Classroom has taken over, and I'm finding it very difficult to get away from Google Classroom again, because at this point it's just become an expectation, and it's actually still a requirement in my district to have it. It doesn't have to be your primary form of delivery, but it is a requirement to have for all classes. So I use Google Classroom like a cache of reference materials. I do like it for grading as well, since our district uses School Tool, which links up with Google Classroom, so you can transfer grades in really easily. So I use Google Classroom. That way things are there for review and reference, right? That's differentiation. Okay. The completed bill of materials, okay, it's based on their own specifications. So their results are differentiated based on their own choices. Right? It's related to what they're doing, not what someone else is doing. That is the epitome of differentiation, right? It's specific to them. Okay, then, okay, all the kids are at different stages of completion in the project, and I let them work at their own pace. Okay, a differentiated pace, once again, that's the kind of stuff an administrator's looking for. Okay, it's also the things that good teachers do, right? The more you can let kids work at their own pace and be self-guided, the better. That's one of the marks of a teacher who has learned their craft and honed it versus one who is still on their way up, right? So the thing this is what I tend to struggle with the most is whole group instruction. I don't do a whole lot of whole group instruction. I do it when I need to teach theory and just basic skills. But 90% of what I do in the classroom is just walking around and helping the kids one-on-one while we complete projects. And that, once again, is differentiation at the highest level. So it's more individualized is what I try and go for, but whole group happens as well. Right? I also, once again, I give kids the opportunity to get individual assistance. Okay, I will meet with them for extra help at their request. Right? I don't hold extra help sessions and request kids to come in. I make them advocate for themselves because I believe it's an essential skill. So my extra help is by appointment only, and that helps to keep my classroom from becoming a hangout. As much as I love my students, I'm very much an introvert, so I need that little bit of alone time every day or I won't make it through the day. I just get very exhausted from social situations like that. So that's why I do extra help in the way that I do there. Okay. Assessment styles. Okay, for this particular one, I'm a fan of heads down, thumbs up, especially when you're doing something where you know there's going to be a wide spread of levels of understanding. So heads down, thumbs up is my formative assessment for something theory-based. So since we're doing math, I might show the kids how to do the math problem. In this case, it was calculating board footage of lumber. And when I'm done teaching a segment, I'll tell them all to put their heads down, and then I ask 3 questions. I tell them, if you feel like you understand this 100% and you're ready to move on, give me a thumbs up. and I'll see who gives me thumbs up. And then I'll say, if you feel like you sort of understand, but you're not quite there yet, give me a thumb sideways. And they'll give me a thumb sideways. And then I'll say, if you feel like you don't understand this at all and you're completely lost, give me a thumbs down. And then I'll do that. And that lets me look at students in order to figure out how well I've taught them what I'm teaching them. So it gives me kind of a spread of understanding. Now, one of the things I didn't do for this particular one, and I think you'll see it mentioned in the post-conference, typically, if you really want to be a superstar as a teacher, when you do something like this head down, thumbs up, that right there is an automatic way that you can figure out how to group your students at different levels of understanding. So what I would be doing is I would take, let's say, all the kids who feel 100%, I would have them break off and work on their own since they're ready to move forward. And then the ones who kind of understand it, I would have pair up with the students who don't understand it at all. And then we would work together in a smaller group to kind of hash it out, clarify it for those who are a little farther, and help bring the ones who are a little bit behind up to speed. And then those kids can work together and sort of figure it out together. I find that works very well. I unfortunately don't get a lot of opportunity to do that, but it's very valuable if you have the opportunity. So that's my formative check, right? That's unofficial. There's no data involved. There's no scoring. It's just a way for me to figure out where everyone is at. Okay. Then I look at my summative, which is that hard data-driven assessment. In this case, which would be grading completion of the bill of materials, right? Making sure it was done correctly and accurately, right? That's assessment. Okay. Then using the results of the assessment. So kids who are struggling, okay, they're brought together for small group remedial. That's what I did in this case. I didn't pair them up with the students that were a little bit higher level in order to support each other, but that's something I would definitely recommend doing. That's one of the things I was more disappointed in myself with on this particular observation. So we got that, okay. And then students who've mastered the skill set, they just continue straight on to their project is what I did here. Right, so that's a little bit of differentiation based on the assessment. Right, and then this one I've always liked. What areas would you like specific feedback on? This is something that I find it's more of a token question because, especially in technology education, most of the time your administrators don't actually understand what your content is. They can come in and they can watch and they understand what you're teaching, but they have trouble with the context and they don't usually understand the purpose so much of our subject area. It's just something that's foreign to them. It's unless they have a background in technology or engineering, essentially the validity of what we teach doesn't really stick with them the same way that it does for your theory-based classes. So what I typically do for something like this is I would just say, what's a method I can use to get a better exit ticket type of evaluation. My evaluation for this was the completed bill of materials, but I know that this is usually something an administrator will look for because it's an easy thing to pick on, especially if they need, you're never going to get a perfect review. It's just impossible. There's always room for improvement, so you're always an administrator is always going to find at least one thing that they can use just to say there's room for improvement here. I'll tell you this, if they say that an exit ticket is the one thing that they can pick on you for, it usually means you did a pretty good job. Unless you had no summative evaluation at all, in which case they actually mean it and you need to figure something out. So that's our pre-conference discussion questions. Okay, this is the first part of the process. Right. So this is a good way to organize yourself. Typically with this, you would also be submitting a lesson plan. At some point, I may show you all a lesson plan, and we'll go from there. But having as many years experience as I do, I know this curriculum inside out, and I generally don't write lesson plans unless I'm being observed. Um, I have no use for them because I know my content, and I teach pretty off the cuff because I'm a very type B person. Um, so I don't really make plans because, as the old saying goes, even the best laid plans don't survive contact with the enemy. So I basically understand that whatever lesson plan I have is going to go out the window the second I start to deliver it. So I typically don't waste my time making formal lesson plans unless I really have to. And when I do, I keep them clear, concise, and correct. Right? A short lesson plan. A lesson plan should never be longer than 1 page if you really know what you're doing. I'll probably do a rundown on that at some point. So this was part 1, okay, pre-conference and setting yourself up for success. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.